The girl couldn't have been more than 19. She was backed against the brick wall of the Carthage County Courthouse, and the man in front of her was twice her size and close enough that she had nowhere left to go. He wasn't touching her. He didn't need to. The space he occupied, the way he leaned, the angle of his shoulders, the particular quality of stillness that belongs only to men who've learned that proximity is its own kind of violence. All of it said the same thing. Stay. Don't move. You don't have a choice here. Cole Drayden saw it from across the street. He was 62 years old, sitting on his 2003 Road King in the shade of a water oak, eating a gas station sandwich he hadn't wanted but bought because his stomach had been running on coffee and stubbornness since Meridian. He'd been back in Mississippi for 47 minutes. He hadn't planned to stop in Carthage. He'd planned to ride straight through, maybe nod at the water tower on the way past, and keep going north to Tupelo, where his sister was waiting with a spare bedroom and the kind of patient silence that only older sisters know how to hold. He hadn't planned on any of this, but plans are just suggestions. The road makes them till reality shows up with a better idea. He set down the sandwich. He sat very still for a moment, watching. The man in front of the girl hadn't noticed him yet. Nobody on that sidewalk had noticed Cole Drayden, which was how it often worked. A lone biker in worn denim and a plain black jacket. No patches, no colors, no club markings of any kind. Just a man on a motorcycle eating lunch in the shade. Easy to overlook. Easy to dismiss. That had been true for 10 years now. 10 years since he'd left the club. 10 years since he'd turned in his patch on a Tuesday morning in a room full of men he'd ridden with for 22 years and said the words that ended it. I'm done. No bad blood. Just done. And they'd let him go, because that was the code. You served with honor. You left with honor, and Cole Drayden had never once broken the code in 22 years of riding. He was just a man on a motorcycle now. But the eyes were the same. The ones that had learned over decades of riding into situations that required reading them correctly, to see exactly what was happening before anyone else in the room knew it had started. He saw the girl's hands, pressed flat against the brick behind her, fingers spread, pushing back against something she couldn't push back against. He saw the man's right hand, hanging loose at his side, close to the badge on his belt. He saw the courthouse steps behind them, empty. He saw the street, midday quiet, the particular hollowness of a small town where people have learned to find other things to look at when certain things happen. Cole Drayden wrapped up the rest of his sandwich, tucked it in his saddlebag. Got off the bike. There are men who leave things behind cleanly, and men who leave things behind the way you leave a room you've lived in for 20 years, even after the furniture's gone. Even after the keys are handed over, the shape of the life you lived there stays pressed into the walls somehow. Something that doesn't quite go away. Cole Drayden was the second kind. He'd grown up in Neshoba County, 40 miles east of Carthage, the second of 4 kids, raised by a woman who worked doubles at a truck stop diner and a man who came and went, like weather. He'd been 17 when he first saw a motorcycle up close, not the Crowman calendar photo kind, but a real working bike, road-worn and honest, belonging to a man named Tubbs, who ran a parts shop outside Philadelphia, Mississippi, and who looked at 17-year-old Cole like he was something worth paying attention to. Tubbs had been a patched member, retired by then, but once the road gets into a man, it doesn't fully leave. He'd taught Cole to ride in a gravel lot on Saturday mornings, and what he taught wasn't just the mechanical operation of a motorcycle. He taught the philosophy of it, the way a bike demands your full presence, the way it panaches inattention and rewards respect, the way the road is honest in a manner that most human institutions never manage to be. Cole had been riding ever since he'd patched in at 24, after 2 years in the army that had taken him to places he still and didn't talk about at dinner tables, and given him the particular quality of calm that combat either destroys in a man or forges into something permanent. He'd risen through the chapters steadily, not because he sought it, but because men who are genuinely unafraid of difficult situations tend to find themselves in positions of responsibility, whether they want them or not. By the time he was 40, he was vice president of the Hattiesburg chapter. By the time he was 52, he was done, not because of anything dramatic, not a falling out, not a conflict, not the kind of rupture that gets turned into stories. He'd just arrived, one morning, at the quiet knowledge that the version of himself that needed the Brotherhood the way he'd once needed it had grown into something that could stand on its own. He was grateful for every mile. He was grateful for every brother. And he was finished. He'd spent the decade since working as a motorcycle mechanic in Hattiesburg, in a shop he owned with a man named Garrett, who'd been his army bunkmate, and who'd asked no questions about the years Cole didn't discuss. He lived alone in a small house, with a covered porch and a dog named Diesel, who was 11 years old and slowing down but still waiting every evening at the gate. He was riding to Tupelo to see his sister Margaret because she'd had a hip replaced 3 weeks ago, and he'd promised he'd come when the worst of it was over. He'd taken the scenic route because the scenic route was always the honest answer when someone asked why you were riding through Mississippi in June. He had not planned to stop in Carthage, but there was a girl against a wall, and Cole Drayton had never, in 62 years, managed to be the kind of man who walked past that. Carthage, Mississippi sits in Leake County like a town that got started and then thought better of it but kept going anyway, out of stubbornness and a shortage of alternatives. It has a courthouse square, they all do, these Mississippi County seats, with the obligatory Confederate monument that someone had half-heartedly wrapped in a tarp 2 years ago and then apparently forgotten about, so it stood there in grey canvas like something embarrassed by itself. The courthouse itself was red brick, built in 1923, with columns that had been repointed recently enough that the new mortar stood out pale against the old like a scar around the square. A hardware store that had been a hardware store since 1951 and showed no signs of becoming anything else. A diner called Maze with a hand-lettered sign in the window, advertising the lunch special, and a smaller sign below it that said, "We reserve the right," without finishing the sentence. Because in a town like this, some sentences didn't need finishing. A law office, a bail bondsman, a barber shop with 2 chairs and 1 barber, who was approximately 100 years old and had probably cut hair in this building since the courthouse was new. The street itself was the kind of clean that comes, not from prosperity, but from a shortage of activity. Not many cars, not many people. The ones who were outmoved with the particular economy of people who have places to be, and no interest in being noticed getting there. The heat was the Mississippi kind, not desert heat, which is honest and dry, but Gulf Coast heat that comes, loaded with humidity like a wet blanket that the air never quite manages to wring out. The water oaks along the sidewalk gave shade that felt approximately 20% cooler than the sun, which was better than nothing. The courthouse steps were limestone, worn pale and smooth in the center from a century of feet. The heavy wood doors at the top were propped open with a cast-iron stopper shaped like a boot. From somewhere inside came the sound of a window unit, working hard and accomplishing little. And against the east wall of the courthouse, where the brick ran round the corner, into an alcove that wasn't quite visible from the street, unless you were sitting exactly where Cole Drayton had been sitting, a girl and a man. And the specific geography of fear. The man was wearing a sheriff's uniform. The girl's name, Cole learned later, was Amara Whitfield. She was 19 years old, a sophomore at Holmes Community College, studying paralegal studies because she wanted to be a lawyer at Holmes. Was what she could afford, and she was the kind of person who worked with what she had and didn't waste time resenting what she didn't. She was the granddaughter of Walter Whitfield, and she had driven 40 minutes from her mother's house in Kosciuszko that morning, specifically to come to this courthouse, specifically to file a document, specifically because her grandfather had asked her to, and because Walter Whitefield's granddaughter did not let her grandfather down, but we'll get to Walter in a moment, because Walter Whitfield deserves his own introduction. He deserves to be met on his own terms, which is not as a victim, and not as a problem, and not as an obstacle in someone else's story, but as exactly what he was, a man, complete, with a life that had been built slowly and honestly over 7 years, and that belonged entirely to him. Walter Whitfield had come home from Vietnam in 1971 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a hearing loss in his left ear from an artillery shell that had landed close enough to teach him permanently what close enough meant. He'd come back to Leake County because it was home, because his mother was there, because the land was there, and because Walter Whitfield was not the kind of man who let other people's opinions of a place to determine his relationship to it. He worked. Lord, had he worked. 31 years at the paper mill in Carthage, rising from floor worker to shift supervisor to the kind of institutional knowledge that management calls irreplaceable, right up until the day they replace you with a software system and a younger man who costs less. He'd retired at 63 with a pension that covered the basics. a handshake from a plant manager who couldn't quite meet his eyes, and a house. The house was the thing. He'd built it himself, not metaphorically, literally, with his hands. With lumber he'd purchased board by board over 4 years of saving, with the help of his brother Raymond and 2 men from his church who believed in the kind of Saturday labor that builds more than walls. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, a kitchen with southern exposure so his wife Eula could have morning light while she cooked. He'd poured the foundation himself. He'd framed every wall. He'd put the roof on in August heat that would have stopped. A younger man, working from first light to last because the lumber was rented, and the time was his. Eula had died in 2019. The house, since then, had been Walter's companion, the place where her presence was most dense, most real, most irreplaceable. He was 78 years old, and someone was trying to take it from him, for the man pressing. Amara against the courthouse wall was Sheriff Dale Prout, 54 years old, Cliff County Sheriff for 12 years, elected first because his predecessor retired, and Prout was the deputy everyone knew, then re-elected twice because in a small county with a small budget and a long institutional memory, challenging the incumbent sheriff requires a particular combination of courage and resources that is difficult to assemble. Prout was not obviously corrupt. This was, in many ways, the most dangerous thing about him. He did not shake people down on roadsides. He did not manufacture drug charges out of thin air for the sport of it. He operated instead in the gray zone of selective enforcement, the traffic stop that happened to occur the day before his zoning meeting, the inspection that found violations in the building belonging to a man who had spoken at a town council session, the investigation that moved very slowly when the subject, Cliff, had friends in the right places, and very quickly when they didn't. He had been doing this for 12 years. He had been getting away with it for 12 years, and what he was doing with Amara Whitfield, against the courthouse wall, was a version of what he'd been doing for 12 years, using the implication of authority, the proximity of consequence, the specific power of a badge in a county where the judge and the sheriff had gone to high school together and played golf on Thursdays, to make someone understand that certain things should not be pursued. Your grandfather's appeal, Prout was saying, his voice low and reasonable, the voice of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. It's a waste of everybody's time, including his. Amara's chin was up. Her hands were flat on the brick, but her chin was up. He has a legal right to file it, she said. He has a legal right to a lot of things. Prout smiled. Doesn't mean any of them are going to do him any good. Cliff's has been assessed and the county's decision has been reviewed and upheld. Your grandfather would be better served using his energy to find somewhere comfortable to spend his retirement. Built that house, and the county needs that corridor for the highway expansion. These things happen. They smile again, warm, patient, utterly merciless. Now I'd hate for this to become something unpleasant. Your grandfather is an old man. He doesn't need the stress of a legal fight he's going to lose. And Yui's eyes moved over her in the specific way that was designed to remind her of her size, her age, her aloneness in this alcove. You've got your whole education ahead of you. It'd be a shame for anything to complicate that. Amara did not move. She was terrified. Cole could see it in the set of her shoulders, in the rigidity of her jaw, in the way her breath was coming slightly too fast, but she did not move. And that was the moment. Cole Drayden stepped around the corner. He didn't rush. He came around the corner of the courthouse wall at the pace of a man who has decided something and is not in a hurry about it. Because hurry implies uncertainty, and Cole Drayden was not uncertain. His boots were quiet on the concrete. His hands were visible, relaxed at his sides, making no gesture that could be misconstrued. He stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Prout. Prout looked at him. "Morning," Cole said. Prout's eyes did the calculation. That law enforcement eyes always do the sweep from boots to face that assesses threat level and adjusts posture accordingly. What he saw, an older man, lean and road-weathered, black jacket without markings, no visible weapon, face like something carved from the kind of wood that doesn't split easily. "Help you," Prout said. "Just checking in." Cole's eyes moved briefly to Amara. "You okay?" Amara looked at him for a split second, the assessment of a young woman who has been taught, correctly, to be cautious about unknown men who appear in confined spaces. She read something in his face. She gave a single small nod. "This is a private conversation," Prout said. "Didn't look private," Cole said. "Looked like a conversation one person wanted to be in and one didn't." My mistake. If I'm wrong. He kept his voice even, conversational, the tone of a man stating observations, not making accusations. I'll stay anyway in case I am wrong. Prute's posture changed. Not dramatically, just the slight squaring of shoulders, the slight lift of the chin. That belongs to men who are accustomed to being the largest authority in any given space, and have just encountered something that isn't responding to that authority correctly. You got business at the courthouse. I do now, Cole said. I'm going to walk this young woman inside and wait while she files whatever she came here to file. Then I'm going to walk her back to her car. He paused. That's my business. This silence lasted about 4 seconds. In that silence, Cole watched Prute decide several things. He watched him assess the street, the sightlines, the witnesses, the absence of witnesses. He watched him calculate whether Cole Drayden was worth the friction. He watched him conclude, correctly, that there was something in Cole's stillness that didn't respond to the usual tools. She can file whatever she wants, Prute said finally. The warmth entirely gone now, just the flat professional surface underneath. Won't change anything. That's not really the point, is it? Cole said. He stepped to the side and slightly forward, placing himself at an angle between Prute and Amara. Not blocking, not confrontational, just present, a body in a space, a fact. Amara moved. She stepped sideways along the wall, reached the open edge of the alcove, and stopped. She looked at Cole. Thank you, she said quietly. Go on inside, he said. I'll be right here. She went up the courthouse steps. Prute watched her go. Then he looked back at Cole with the flat, careful expression of a man who is storing something away for later. Don't know who you are, Prute said. Cole Drayden, Cole said. Hattiesburg, just passing through. Stopping in, Cole said. For a bit. Prute held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he adjusted his belt. Nodded once in the way of men who want the last gesture, even when they don't have the last word, and walked away down the sidewalk toward the courthouse parking lot. Cole stood in the shade and watched him go. Then he sat down on the courthouse steps and waited for Amara Whitfield to come back out. She came out 22 minutes later. She sat down beside him on the limestone steps. Without being asked, the instinctive proximity of someone who has recently been frightened and is standing close to the first thing that felt safe. The clerk almost didn't take it, she said. She kept saying there were procedural issues with the filing. Then I showed her the statute and she took it. Good, Cole said. It won't matter. Her voice was tired in the way that's worse than anger. My grandfather knows it won't matter. The county has already decided. Judge Beaumont signed the eminent domain order 6 weeks ago. We filed an objection. It got dismissed. This appeal, she stopped. It's the last thing we have. Tell me about the land, Cole said. So she told him. Walter Whitfield owned 4.2 acres in the northeastern corner of Leake County. He'd owned it since 1974, when he'd purchased it from an elderly couple named Dorsey who were moving to Florida and wanted cash in a quick close. He'd paid $8,000 for it, every cent of his Vietnam discharge savings, and a loan from his mother that he'd repaid in full in 3 years. The county had come to him 14 months ago with an appraisal of $62,000 and a notice of eminent domain, citing the Carthage County Highway Expansion Project, a planned extension of State Road 35 that would require a right-of-way through the northeastern corner of Leake County. Walter had hired a lawyer. The lawyer had filed an objection to the appraisal value. $62,000 for 4.2 acres with a house on it was, by an incomparable market analysis, approximately 40% below what the property was worth. The objection had been reviewed by the county and denied. The denial had been appealed to circuit court. The circuit court judge was the Honorable Raymond Beaumont, who had been in that position for 19 years and who was, as the whole county quietly knew and nobody publicly said, golf partners and fraternity brothers and 40-year friends with Sheriff Dale Prute. The appeal had been dismissed. Your lawyer, Cole said. Cliffy Bapshi, Amara said. And no, she's still trying, but she said the local options are exhausted. She's looking at federal fair housing angles, but it takes time and money, and my grandfather is she's stopped. Again, he's 78. He has a bad heart. The stress of this, every time there's a setback, I watch him get smaller. He built that house. He poured the foundation with his own hands. He buried my grandmother from that house. Her voice stayed steady through all of it, with the effort of someone who has been steady for a long time and is very close to the edge of it. and they're going to take it for $62,000 and build a road through it. Cole said. Nothing for a moment. The highway expansion, he said. Who's the contractor? Amara looked at him. What? The state road project. Who got the construction contract? She thought. A company out of Jackson. Meridian something. Meridian Capital Construction. Something shifted behind Cole's eyes. Quiet, like a key turning. In a lock. You know who owns Meridian Capital? He said. No. Cole didn't say anything else. He pulled out his phone, a basic smartphone. Nothing fancy, and looked at something for about 90 seconds while Amara waited. Then he put the phone down on the step between them so she could see the screen. It was a Louisiana Secretary of State business registration record accessed through a public database. The registered agent for Meridian Capital Construction, LLC, incorporated in Louisiana in 2021, was a man named Thomas Dale Prout Jr. Thomas Dale Prout Jr. was the sheriff's son. Amara looked at the screen for a long time. The sheriff, she said, slowly, threatened my grandfather into accepting a Bella market offer so that the county could acquire the land cheaply, so that a state contract could go to a company his son owns. That's what it looks like, Cole said. That's not just corruption, she said. That's a federal crime. Several of them, Cole said. Wire fraud, civil rights violations, abuse of office. He picked up his phone. He said your lawyer is looking at federal angles. Yes, she needs to look at this angle. He stood up. Give me her number. What happened in the next 18 hours is the part of the story that could fill a book on its own. But I'll give you the shape of it. Cole called the lawyer, a woman named Patricia Okafor, 41 years old, who had taken Walter Whitfield's case at a reduced fee because she'd grown up in Leake County and had personal and specific reasons for understanding what happened when powerful men in small counties decided that the law belonged to them. Patricia had been looking at federal civil rights statutes. She had not found the Meridian Capital connection because she hadn't known to look for it, because nobody had thought to trace the construction contract back through an LLC registered in another state. When Cole sent her the screenshot, she was quiet on the phone for 11 seconds. Then she said, I need you to sit on this until tomorrow morning. Why? Cole said. Because I need to call the Mississippi State Attorney's office tonight, and I need to know they're going to move before Prout finds out. We know if he gets wind of this before we've filed, documents disappear, witnesses get talked to, evidence gets complicated. She paused. Can you stay in Carthage tonight? Cole looked around the parking lot of the motel he'd checked into 40 minutes earlier. I'm already here, he said. He called Margaret and told her he'd be a day late. She said, Cole, Drayden, what did you get yourself into? He said, nothing I'm walking away from. She sighed the sigh of a woman who has been the older sister of Cole. Drayden for 65 years and knows exactly what that means. Then Cole made one more call. He called a number he hadn't called in 10 years. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, rough, familiar, the voice of a man named Hector Ruiz, who had been his sergeant at arms for 8 years and who had known, when Cole left, to leave the door open. Cole Drayden, Hector said. You, still alive, Cole said. I need something. Name it. I need 15 brothers in Carthage, Mississippi by 9 tomorrow morning. Not for trouble, for witness, for presence, for the kind of thing that happens when people need to see that something isn't happening in the dark. A pause. What's the situation? Cole told him. Another pause. 9 a.m., Hector said. We'll be there by 8. They came from 3 directions, 15 motorcycles, rolling into Carthage in the early morning light, when the dew was still on the courthouse grass and the hardware store hadn't opened yet, and the whole square had the quiet of a town that didn't know yet what the day was going to bring. They parked in a line along the east side of the square, facing the courthouse. Engines off, riders on their bikes or standing beside them, not blocking anything, not threatening anything. Just there, 15 men in leather, patient and present and completely visible, in the particular way that says, whatever happens this morning, it is happening in front of witnesses. Cole was already inside. He was sitting in the office at the Leake County Courthouse, across from a man named Assistant State Attorney David Kwan, who had driven down from Jackson at 6 in the morning because Patricia Okafor had called him at 10 the previous night with a conversation that began with the words, I have something you're going to want to see before you make any decisions about how this week is going to go. David Kwan was 38 years old and had spent 4 years building public corruption cases. And he had the particular focus of someone who has been shown a thread and has already, in his mind, begun pulling it. Cole set the printed documentation on his desk. The Meridian Capital registration. The contract award records Patricia had pulled from the state procurement database overnight. The timeline, the eminent domain filing, the low appraisal, the dismissed appeals. The contract award to Meridian Capital 11 days after the appraisal was finalized. Kwan read it in silence. Then he said, "This is the kind of thing that goes to a grand jury." "I know," Cole said. "This is also the kind of thing that, if the subject gets advance notice." "I know," Cole said again. "That's why I'm here at 7:30 in the morning, and why I made sure nobody in that courthouse found out I was coming until I was already in your building." Kwan looked at him for a moment. "Who are you, exactly?" "Just a man passing through," Cole said. "Who stopped?" The state attorney's office filed emergency intervention papers in federal district court before noon that day. The eminent domain proceeding against Walter Whitfield's property was stayed pending investigation. Sheriff Dale Pruitt was served with a federal target letter at 2:47 in the afternoon, not at the courthouse, not in public, but at his home, by 2 federal agents who had driven from Jackson and who knocked on his door with the calm efficiency of people who have done this before and will do it again. Judge Raymond Beaumont received a notice of judicial conduct inquiry the same afternoon, delivered by a process server who found him on the 14th hole of the Carthage Country Club and who, by all accounts, didn't seem particularly sorry about the timing. Meridian Capital construction was suspended from state contracting pending audit. Walter Whitefield's appeal was reinstated. Cole heard all of this from Patricia Oak, who called him at 4 in the afternoon while he was sitting on his bike in the courthouse parking lot, leaning against the seat, watching the water oaks move in a slight afternoon breeze that had finally managed to push some of the heat aside. He'd been in Carthage for 28 hours. He'd eaten 1 gas station sandwich and 2 cups of motel coffee and a plate of eggs at May's Diner that the owner, a woman in her 60s, who'd watched the morning's events through her window with the expression of someone seeing something she'd waited a long time to see, had refused to let him pay for. He thought about driving out to Walter Whitfield's property. Before he left, Patricia had offered to take him, said Walter, had asked to meet the man who'd found the thread. Cole thought about it for a while. Then he called Patricia back and said, "Tell him the thread was always there. He just needed someone to pull it." She laughed, not a small laugh, a real one, the kind that comes out when something has finally broken the right direction after too long going the wrong way. "He's going to want to thank you," she said. "He can keep his house," Cole said. "That's thanks enough." He rode out of Carthage at 4:45 in the afternoon. The 15 brothers were gone by then, back to Hattiesburg, back to their lives, back to the ordinary Tuesday that had briefly become something else. Hector had clapped him on the shoulder before they left and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said, because that was the code, and the code held even across 10 years and a turned-in patch. Cole rode north, toward Tupelo on roads he'd ridden when he was young, and the world had been both larger and smaller, simultaneously larger because it was new, smaller because he hadn't yet learned how much of it there was. The late afternoon light came at a low angle through the pine trees and laid itself across the road in long gold bars. His knee ached the way it always ached after a long day. The engine ran steady beneath him. He was going to be late, too. Margaret's. She was going to feed him something and not ask to. Many questions and eventually ask all of them. He thought about Amara Whitfield, who had stood with her hands flat against a courthouse wall and her chin up, who had not moved, who had filed her document anyway and shown her grandfather's attorney the statute that made the clerk take it, who was going to be a very good lawyer someday, who already was one, in every way that mattered. He thought about Walter, a man he'd never met, a man who had poured a foundation with his own hands and planted a life in it, and refused to let it be erased by people who had confused the power they temporarily held with the right to take what wasn't theirs. He thought about what it means to do the right thing in a county where the right thing has been made structurally difficult, where the judge and the sheriff went to school together, where the street empties out when certain things happen, where a 19-year-old girl drives 40 minutes to file a paper on behalf of her grandfather because somebody in that family has to keep trying. The road stretched north through the Mississippi afternoon, and Cole Drayton rode it at an honest pace, not rushing, not running, just moving the way he'd always moved. the way the road had taught him to move forward and present and paying attention. There's a thing people assume about men who've lived the way Cole Drayden lived. They assume the decade of riding, the patch, the code, the brothers. They assume all of that is the part that made him someone who stood between a girl and a war. But I don't think that's right. I think the patch came because of what was already in him. I think the road found a man who was already built a certain way, who already couldn't walk past certain things, who already knew that silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of choice, and who had made a different choice so many times it had become the only one he knew how to make. I've met men who rode for decades and learned nothing, and I've met men who rode for a year and came back understanding everything. The miles aren't the teacher, the attention is dot. Cole Drayden had been paying attention for 62 years. When a girl needed someone to step around a corner, he stepped around the corner, not because he was fearless, not because he was a hero, not because he had 15 brothers he could call, because he was paying attention, and because he had decided a long time ago that being a certain kind of man in the easy moments was only worth something if you were still that man in the hard ones. That's the story. That's what the road teaches, if you let it. Some people look away. Some people don't. The ones who don't, they don't always have a patch on their back. Sometimes they're just a man on a motorcycle who stopped for lunch, and stayed.